Rachel Holt for NESN.com. Thanks for tuning into our fantasy football podcast. I'm joined now by Adam Meyer of FOX Sports. Adam, thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, Adam, it's an exciting Week 13 that we're heading into, depending on your league settings. Playoffs are right around the corner, so at this point, maybe you're in the playoffs, maybe you're out of them. But either way, we want to give the people some good advice to at least get a couple more wins under their belt before the season ends. And at this point, Adam, let's talk strategy. There's two teams on byes this week, the Cleveland Browns and the Tennessee Titans. So you might be looking for people off the waiver wire. But to my understanding, at this point, it's less about the waiver wire and more about working with what you have. Is that true?
100%. That's what it is. Right now, you're just basically building up your bench in case something happens. Maybe if you haven't put the handcuff with your running back, maybe, if Derrick Henry's still out there and you had DeMarco Murray and he's been out there and maybe like in a 10-team league, now's the time to get these guys because once playoffs hit, it's going to be crunch time and everyone's going to be in that waiver wire. So absolutely, I think that it's more about building that bench and preparing for your playoff matchups because in week one, you can't really see who the worst defense is going to be. Now's the fact that you can kind of see how the defenses are. I think you can kind of match up quite nicely now with your fantasy playoffs.
A person that people will try to target on the waiver wire if they are in need of a quarterback is Colin Kaepernick. This guy, we've talked about him before, but he was one of the big performers of the week. In Week 12, he had over 100 rushing yards, almost 300 passing yards. Is this the quarterback you would recommend if we're still looking for someone?
Absolutely. He continues to be under-owned in fantasy leagues, only owned in 16.5% of FoxSports.com leagues. And well, I get that he's on a terrible team and they've lost 10 straight, and I get people may not like him as an individual, but the guy can produce fantasy stats. I mean, that's the thing about teams or players on terrible teams is that they still produce, at a high fantasy level. Kaepernick had the second most fantasy points last week behind Drew Brees. I mean, they're going to trail a lot in games. He's going to need to pass the ball. Also, as you mentioned, he can run the ball as well. So with him averaging around 53 rushing yards per game now, I mean, I know that some running backs would kill to average that. I mean, look at Todd Gurley right now who's been struggling, or Doug Martin trying to get started. I mean, there's some running backs out there who can't perform on this consistent of a level. And with Kaepernick giving you those running stats, along with passing, at least passing touchdowns in each of the past few games, I think he's a guy that you definitely want to go with, especially this week facing the Bears. Great matchup for him. I think that Kaepernick is a must-add for someone who maybe has Mariota. I doubt a lot of guys need help if you have Browns quarterbacks you're struggling to begin with. So basically we're focusing on Tennessee players right now. So if you have Mariota or if you have quarterbacks facing tough matchups, Kaepernick might be one guy you want to have this week for sure.
Yeah, if you had Browns quarterbacks, you're not upset that they're on the bye this week.
Exactly.
Adam, I have to ask you about some of the guys that did well in Week 12 and how this applies to Week 13. First off, the Saints. Drew Brees had a monster day. You talked about Colin Kaepernick being the second best quarterback in Week 12, but number one was firmly Drew Brees, and it showed in all the guys on the team. Mark Ingram felt the effects of that, Tim Hightower. Are there any matchups that you're liking in Week 13 where you expect these quarterbacks to have these monster days and then it hands out to the rest of the fantasy football players?
Well, they continue to have a high over-under this week, so I'm going to continue to roll with those Drew Brees Saints. They have an over-under of around like 54.5, I believe, last I checked. So, anyone in the New Orleans-Detroit game, I think, is a plus there. You mentioned that everyone had a good day for New Orleans. I wouldn't say Brandon Cooks agrees with you in that one, considering that he had 0 targets last week. He actually came out on Tuesday complaining about his role in that offense. So I think one of two things is going to happen. They say the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So I don't know if Drew Brees goes by that mantra. Either Cooks is going to have a monster day against Detroit this week, or I could see Brees saying, you know what, we scored 49 points without you, and clearly he's not as important of a role in the offense as requested. I mean, if you look, Michael Thomas leads the team in targets, receptions, yards, touchdowns. Michael Thomas is the go-to guy for New Orleans. So I continue to go with Michael Thomas there. But, I mean, Snead has the same number of receptions as Brandon Cooks. I think Fleener, granted, people are really going to complain about Fleener's performance in fantasy, but Detroit is terrible against opposing tight ends. I think Fleener is one guy you're going to look for this week that can have a really good day. And then, the running game, obviously Mark Ingram is back as the main guy there. Hightower only had a good day because of that touchdown catch at the end of the game. If not for that huge catch from Willie Snead, Hightower starters would be very frustrated about his performance. So I don't know if you can bank on him having a good day, but definitely like Ingram, definitely like Thomas, and also Fleener in that Saints offense.
Let's talk about the Patriots for a second. Of course, there's concerns about Rob Gronkowski. He was injured, had to be taken out of the game against the Jets, and put up a big stat, 0 if you owned him for that game. So concerns for his health moving forward. And Malcolm Mitchell came out of nowhere and had 2 TDs. He's been picking up steam in the past couple of weeks, and he might be a guy to look at off the waiver wire. As far as their matchup goes, they're hosting the Rams this week. What are you expecting in Week 13, given that Drew Brees just had a monster day against the Rams?
Yeah, exactly. I think that we can look for much of the same. I know that with Tom Brady missing a lot of time with practice last week, you kind of saw that taking effect in their game this week. And obviously without Gronk there and Martellus Bennett leaving with an injury, it really hampered their offense. I think that now, while we don't know what Gronk's status is, I can almost guarantee Brady will be practicing every single day. So I think with Brady there, obviously, if Gronk isn't there, huge boost to Malcolm Mitchell. If you look at his past 2 games, at least 5 targets in each of the past 2, 3 touchdowns in the past 2 games combined, facing the Rams offense. You know that Michael Thomas had a big day. I expect the same for Malcolm Mitchell, especially if Gronk is out. Big numbers for Mitchell there. But also don't sleep on Chris Hogan. I think that Hogan getting involved in the offense, he played a lot of snaps last week. I think if Hogan gets healthy, that's going to be a guy that is going to fly under the radar, especially, you're familiar with him as much as we are. That Patriots offense tends to not repeat to the same top performer from week in to week out. So if Mitchell had a big day last week, expect Chris Hogan to be the lead guy this week. But yeah, I think that other than that, tight end wise, if you're looking to fill that role, if Gronk is still not going to see time there, one other guy that may also be hurt is Jordan Reed for Washington. And if that's the case, Vernon Davis needs to be a guy you need to add on your roster. Even last week, with Jordan Reed missing time and coming back and forth in the game on Thanksgiving, Vernon Davis, 5 catches, 68 yards. 2 games before that against Minnesota, 66 yards and a touchdown. He seems to thrive in that offense with or without Jordan Reed. So if Reed misses time with that really severe shoulder injury he has, I think Vernon Davis is a must-add. Other than that, maybe C.J. Fedorowicz for Houston, at least 5 targets, and I believe, the past 8 games there. He's got Green Bay this week, then the Colts the week after that, and the Jaguars. I think Fedorowicz, granted he hasn't the best quarterback throwing to him, I think that's the guy you need to look for from the tight end wise as well. So, again, not a lot of great options, but I think that it all depends on who is injured. So, Fedorowicz and Vernon Davis will be available if need be.
Okay, great. And my last question for you, Adam, is if you're in a Survivor League and you've been picking every team that's playing the Browns, you've been picking on poor Cleveland this entire time, well, you've made it to Week 13. But the issue with that is now you have to decide on your own. You can't use that strategy anymore because the Browns are on a bye. So is there any matchup that you're looking at that should be a sure bet for a particular team out there?
Well, the Patriots have the biggest spread going in their favor with 13.5 against the Rams. But I'm guessing there might be times people had to pick the Patriots because they face the Browns in, week 4 or 5. So if you already use that option up, a couple other out there. You had the Saints are 6-point favorites against the Lions. Packers 6-point favorites against Houston. Denver 5 points against Jacksonville. Those are all probably your top options there. I think those are going to be your best bets. Maybe even Pittsburgh against the Giants, because Pittsburgh at home seems to be a pretty safe bet there as well. So I go for some of the 6-point favorite games if you're looking to survive this week.
Okay, any final comments as we head into Week 13?
Like you said, people are getting ready for the fantasy playoffs. So one thing I would suggest is just plan for that week ahead in advance. Everyone needs to make those waiver wire claims on Tuesday night going into Wednesday morning. So if you already know you're in the playoffs, look at those Week 14 matchups right now and try to add those teams to your list. Looking at Week 14, you're going to have, the Bengals facing the Browns. So maybe go for that Bengals defense right now. You're going to have the Lions facing the Bears. Maybe go for that Lions defense facing a potential Matt Barkley there at quarterback. I mean, take advantage of those matchups a week in advance. That way, you're not hoping you have the lower priority list going into that matchup. That way, you're a step ahead of the game. So when everyone's fighting over the Week 14 guys, you can look ahead at potentially getting Week 15 guys and going further in advance. That way, you're already one step ahead of everyone else.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adam. And last thing, where can we find more from you?
Always on Twitter, Fox Sports Meyer. You'll find a lot of my work there. And then also foxsports.com/fantasy. That way you'll find a lot of our player rankings that comes out on Wednesday. Also my start-sit list coming out on Wednesday as well. And then on Sunday, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., 3-hour-long start-sit chats on foxsports.com/fantasy where me, John Halpin, and DJ Foster answer all of your start-sit questions and try to get you guys into the playoffs this week.